A monk asked Unmon in all earnestness, "What is Buddha?" Unmon said, "Kanshiketsu." Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Kōan Series. In the Kōan Series, we'll read and discuss famous koans used by real Buddhist monks from such sources as the Blue Cliff Record, the Gateless Gate, the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, and many others. As you'll remember, over-intellectualizing koans is completely anathema to how koans are used and ought to be used in real Buddhist practice, so keep that in mind. However, I'm here to give some extra context and meaning to some of these koans so that you might see them in a new light and gain some newer, deeper meaning from them than you did before. I hope you enjoy. Today's case is number 21 of the Gateless Gate, and it comes to us from the Koun translation, which we've spent most of our time with. The name of the koan is Unmon's Kanshiketsu. Unmon, known in Chinese by his Dharma name Yunmen Wenyan, was a Chan master of the Tang dynasty. He lived from 862 to around 949, and he was a central figure of the Yunmen school of Chinese Buddhism, one of the 5 schools of Chan in Chinese history. We've discussed others of these schools, such as the Linji and Saodong, which would become Rinzai and Soto in Japan. Kanshiketsu is Japanese for dried shit stick, and it refers to the way ancient peoples used to clean themselves after defecation. In modern times, we may use toilet paper, cloth, bidets, etc. But back in ancient times, it was common to tie a cloth or a sponge to the end of a short stick and use that to wipe oneself. What could he possibly mean by this? We'll spend a lot of our time discussing that. What we will discover is that the word kanshiketsu is a Zen expression that comes to be used for a person who is overly attached to everyday mundane reality as it appears to us in the stream of experience. This koan is a part of why that's the case. What does that mean for the meaning and context of it, though? In order to answer that, we're going to get a little intertextual and discuss different types of Zen phrases or koans. We've not spent much time dealing with what I would call Zen pedagogy, mostly because I don't view myself as qualified to speak to that side of things, not being a monk myself. But I think I have some reliable sources to refer to. Next, we will continue our discussion of the shocking things that Zen masters would say or do to elicit an enlightenment experience in their students. We've spoken of slapping across the face, farting loudly, shouting, or other things like that. And we should address the non sequitur expressions in dialogue, such as masagin from case 18 or mu from case 1. Finally, we should discuss the two truths doctrine, which addresses the difference between the world of appearances, as we've called it, and the world of the Dharma. Together, I think these concepts will help shed some light on this koan. Let's get started. First, let's look at Zen pedagogy and categorizations of koans. Koun Yamada's Teisho, or commentarial Dharma talk, on each of the cases in the Gateless Gate are all amazing resources to turn to for further information and context on the koans that we discuss. They're presented in an easy-to-understand style while remaining faithful to the spirit and to the goals of Zen koan practice. Koun Yamada is our insider. We can refer to him for information on how Zen is taught, what these koans are meant to cause us to think about and experience, and where to go from here. Koun Yamada describes 3 categories of Zen phrase or koan. The first is the box and its lid. When a student asks a really good question, and the master gives a really good answer that perfectly suits that question, then the two match together very well, like a box and its particular lid. The second category is cutting off all delusions. This is when a master says something that has the power to immediately cut through to the heart of the Dharma, through the listener's delusions like a sharp sword. The third category is waves following waves. And this category refers to when the master speaks in a way that matches the student's level of understanding perfectly. All koans, and further, all instruction in Zen, are supposed to fulfill all 3 requirements at the same time. Let's examine this koan through the lens of those 3 categories. Seeing it as the box and its lid, or as a perfect match between question and answer, is the connection we're called upon to contemplate as we work through this koan. How does dried shit stick, match with the question of what is the Buddha? To our mundane, everyday perspective, the question deals with the Buddha, a divine figure, and the answer deals with something vulgar, a butt-wiping device. We think of the Buddha as being marked only by positive traits. He's divine, he's achieved purity of mind, speech, and body, and he's perfect. A shitstick is dirty, marked by vulgarity, and impure by every definition. Thus, these two are complete and total opposites. On the one level, this koan is challenging that kind of dualistic thinking. It's calling on us to see past what we think of as good or bad, pure or impure, clean or dirty. But regardless, by that perspective of having them as complete and total opposites, they could be understood as fitting together in a mirror-like kind of way. To use a term from literature, we could see the Buddha and the shitstick as foils to each other, characters that only highlight each other's traits. However, even that is an incomplete perspective. In the framework of that first category of phrase in Zen pedagogy, this koan challenges us to understand how the question and the answer, the Buddha and the shitstick, actually fit together perfectly, not as opposites, but rather as corresponding to one another the same way that 4 perfectly corresponds to the question, what is 2 plus 2? So what happens when we unpack that connection? According to the spirit of this koan, thinking that there is this ontological relationship of opposites between the Buddha and a shitstick, thinking that there are no shared characteristics at all between the Buddha and a shitstick, is a symptom of being overly attached to dualistic understandings of reality. We know that Mahayana Buddhism, and Zen in particular, asserts non-duality, where there is nothing substantial to support the belief in the existence of a negatory relationship between phenomena and reality. Negatory relationship being defined here as A is not B, B is not A. Instead, all things share the nature of suchness, all things share the nature of emptiness, all things share Buddha nature. This is true even to the level of a shitstick. We will obviously not hear the Dharma from a shitstick. We should not make offerings to a shitstick. And we shouldn't worship a shitstick. But we should not think of the Buddha as being a part of the world of all that is good and pure, and a shitstick as being outside of that world. That world is a category that we're imposing on reality, and that category doesn't actually reflect anything substantial about the world it's imposed on. Rather, it actually reflects more about our own minds. That is the heart of mind-only Buddhism, and this is the heart of Zen as well. So if all things in reality share this nature of suchness, emptiness, and Buddha nature, then the question and answer in this koan fit together perfectly, because the Buddha and the shitstick do not live in these mutually exclusive realms or categories. They're all part of the Buddha realm. They are all Buddhahood, or Buddha nature itself. To take it a step further, we talked about Kanshiketsu as being an expression directed at people too attached to the categories that their minds impose on the world. This word is not meant to be an insult or a derogatory term. It's not intended to hurt a uniquely stupid portion of the population. It's actually meant to imply anybody who has not reached enlightenment or Buddhahood themselves. That includes most of us. All sentient beings, even those who are on the path, are inherently attached to the world of appearances, the impositions of the mind onto the world around them due to karma. Thus, this isn't like calling someone an idiot or a shithead or an infidel. It's more like somebody who's stuck in the cycle of birth and death. Asking what is the Buddha is a symptom of not having reached the level of understanding to know that the Buddha and the shitstick share the same nature. And so to respond with Kanshiketsu has the other layer of meaning to simply call out that person's level of realization. Now let's look at the second category of phrase in Zen pedagogy, cutting off all delusions. Interpreting this koan through that lens shows us Unmon's skill as a master. In our analogy, for a koan to fulfill the requirements of this category, it has to cut through to the heart of a teaching, like a sword. In this case, the sword that Unmon is choosing to wield is the chosen subject matter, something that our everyday perspective tells us is impure, dirty, vulgar, mundane, or somehow un-Buddha-like. For the sword to be sharpest, for it to most starkly demonstrate the point, the response needs to be that which we think of as being farthest from the category of Buddha-like, according to the unenlightened perspective. If he said dirty laundry, then that would have addressed the same category of stuff that we typically think of as being un-Buddha-like, but it's not as sharp and evocative of a cutting phrase. It doesn't evoke the very heart of what Unmon is teaching. Shitstick is a much more incisive expression in relation to our everyday delusions. It is an image we have in our minds as being the farthest from having any shared characteristics with the Buddha himself. To take it one step further, and to get a little gross with it, what function does a shitstick serve? It wipes away impurities. It's a very strong metaphor for the activity of the Buddha. And when we start to see it this way, we can start to see the shared characteristics between the Buddha and the shitstick. When you ask a person, what is the most concretely important object in your home? They may respond with items that they have a strong sentimental attachment to, or they may respond to the object that affords them the most daily convenience, or they may refer to the object that is the most versatile and can serve the most functions. But the truth of the matter is that actually there are 3 items that are undeniably the most important to a person's continued survival and existence in a space. They are the toilet paper or bidet or shitstick, and the place where garbage goes, whether it's a trash can or a compactor or a box or a cabinet that somehow separates the trash from where you sleep. Can you imagine your life without those 3 things? Would you be able to continue to live in your home without them? When asked about the most important items in our homes, these 3 don't immediately come to mind because they have connotations of being dirty or vulgar or places of waste and grossness, places that we conceal from our identity. However, they do more to preserve our health and hygiene than anything else in the house. The toilet removes our human waste and saves it from causing disease and attracting vermin into our house. The receptacle for trash does the exact same thing with our food waste and our packaging waste. And the way that we wipe ourselves and remove the last traces of human waste from our bodies keeps us more healthy than we would even realize in the modern era. Now, let's explore this koan in the context of the 3rd category of Zen phrase, waves following waves. The meaning of this category is a bit more abstract than the other 2. The first one reflects a perfect conceptual match between question and answer, and the second one refers to the answer's ability to cut through your deluded thinking, and this one refers to the relationship between master and student, and the master's understanding of the student's ability to understand the move that the master's trying to make. However, it even goes one step further than speaking directly to the level of understanding that the disciple has. It needs to be intelligible enough to get the disciple started, but it has to challenge the disciple to meditate and practice further to unpack the total meaning of the dialogue. It can't be too obvious, or the student doesn't learn anything, but it can't be too obscure either, or the student has nothing to go on. Knowing that makes this koan a little bit more contextually specific. For this phrase to fulfill the requirements of the category, then we must infer and trust that Unmon understood the level of realization of his disciple and gave him an appropriate phrase to reflect on. That being the case, in looking at this category, we've been understanding the master-student relationship in a very specific narrative fashion. To be specific, we've been understanding that in the context of the story laid out by the koan, Unmon was the master to the monk who asked the original question, what is the Buddha? To take this koan a step further, what if we understood the koan itself as the master and us as the readers, as students? That changes things in a very interesting way. If we interpret the master-student relationship in that way and examine this koan accordingly with the 3rd category of phrase, then we don't have to trust in the subjectivity and the specific contextuality of Unmon's interaction with that particular disciple, though practicing that kind of faith and observing and witnessing that kind of knowledge and wisdom is valued in Zen. Looking at the koan as the master and ourselves as the student, we can think of it as presenting a question that we would all have and a direct answer to that question. The reason this show exists, and the reason that people listen to it, is because there is this question that people want an answer to. What is the Buddha? What is Buddhism? Though that was one of our earliest questions on the podcast that we answered and moved on from, we haven't left it behind. Every one of the 200-something episodes that we've uploaded has been contributing to answering that singular question. In its own kind of way, this koan answers that question. We can read ourselves into the role of the monk asking, "What is Buddha?" And the master answers, "Kanshiketsu." Now let's turn our discussion to the wacky stuff that Zen masters have been known to do to teach and elicit sudden enlightenment in their disciples. The most famous example of this would be the keisaku, also called the kyosaku or the shippei, and this is a thin and flexible flat stick that is used during zazen. When an enforcing monk looking over a group of meditating monks detects a lapse in their concentration or sleepiness or a lapse of focus in any of them, then he can slap the meditating monk on the shoulder or on the meaty part of the upper back using this keisaku. This has a couple of different prescribed purposes. On the one hand, it keeps the monks present and focused. The monks' thoughts cannot wander. The monks themselves cannot succumb to tiredness, and they can't stray from their concentration for even a second, or else they'll get slapped. How long can you realistically think about one single thing without your thoughts straying even a little bit or your concentration waning for just a moment? If you've ever actually tried it, it's really, really hard. A very common entry-level meditation technique is to think of a candle flame and count from 1 to 10. And any time that your thoughts stray from the candle flame, then you have to start over. I challenge you to try that right now, and I almost guarantee that you won't be able to make it to 10. If you can, that's a great achievement. You have very solid control and command over your thoughts, and you have excellent clarity of mind. The highest I think I've ever gotten in my whole life is 7. In another capacity, the keisaku stick is meant to elicit a sudden enlightenment experience. The practice of seated meditation is considered to be a gradual cultivation that helps you on the way to reaching enlightenment, but enlightenment itself is considered to be a sudden experience. It can strike like lightning at any moment, and it can happen as a result of the slap. The reason why it's a slap that is used and why it's thought that that particularly works is related to a very common human experience. If you suddenly douse yourself with ice-cold water, or if you are suddenly and very unexpectedly slapped in the face or punched in the face, there's a passing instant where you're 1000% snapped back into the present moments, where your thoughts, your beliefs, your ideas of self are completely erased from your mind. And all there is in this universe is you, pure perception, and experience. You can't keep thinking about whatever it is you were thinking about. You can't have this idea of self. You are completely locked into this one instant of pure experience. Then, when that instant passes, your brain begins to make judgments about the sensation, begins to come up with responses, thought patterns, and behaviors, and things like that. If you're slapped, your brain registers the physical pain, and you begin to feel anger or shock or whatever, and think of coming up with a response, like slapping back or calling out or something like that. Everyday people can't spend their whole lives in that one instant of pure experience. We can't just be slapped 24/7. And even if we could, we would quickly acclimate to it and resume our lives as relatively normal. So, this stick is employed as a means of eliciting that experience in some small measure in meditators. And it's thought that the more you meditate and train, the longer that instant lasts, and the more likely it is to stick and last forever. Other techniques that Zen teachers have used have included shouts, non sequitur utterances, loud farts, or facial expressions. Whichever of these techniques is employed, it's not enough for it to shock and to disrupt the flow of experience, though that is a key piece. It must do so with intention and meaning. They're meant to fit in a given dialogue, just not in the way that our everyday perception would expect. They challenge one to break outside the confines of everyday perception, cognition, and experience to try and receive a message on a higher level of communication. In that, these techniques of teaching are considered to fall under the category of upaya, or skillful means. The master can and should use all possible tools at their disposal to teach, to get a message across. And what they often find is that everyday language is only so useful in doing that. They find that breaking free of convention or breaking into nonverbal means of communication are just as effective, if not more effective, than words themselves. It's easy to have a really overly simplified and calcified belief system built on or around a specific word or phrase. This is what is meant by the phrase too attached to the world of appearances, which is what the metaphor of Kanshiketsu refers to. It's much harder, nigh impossible, to possess that sort of calcified and overly simplified belief system about a specific unexpected experience in the midst of that very same experience, especially if it's a complicated experience that has a specific context that can never be replicated again. We may shape belief systems after the fact, but in the moment, we find ourselves in that same state as though we were slapped with the keisaku. In this koan, that very same process is at play. Everything about the dialogue is meant to cause us to feel like we have been conceptually slapped in the face or doused in icy water. And the more meditating we've done leading up to it, the more deeply and widely we'll experience that state. So, we've established that there is a difference between two states of being, two levels of perceiving the reality around us. There is an everyday, conventional, mundane one that we're pretty used to. This is the realm of our beliefs, our memories, our perceptions, our judgments, our behaviors, and our worldview. This can be understood as conventional reality. Beyond that state of reality, there's a state that is the beginning and end of all of our beliefs, our memories, our perceptions, our judgments, our behaviors, and our worldview. It's the reality we're living in when we're doused with cold water, when we're slapped in the face, and when we're meditating at a Zen monastery and get slapped with the keisaku. This is the realm where our beliefs, memories, perceptions, judgments, behaviors, and worldview fall away and cannot color our cognition and our experience in any way anymore. This is where the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, reveals itself to us exactly as it is. What I'm describing is the Buddhist doctrine of the two truths. In Sanskrit, this is known as Dvasatya, and Japanese, Nitai. This doctrine speaks to two levels of cognition and experience, two levels at which things are true, two levels of looking at the world around us. Conceptually, what this doctrine does is that it acknowledges our everyday experience and reality as it happens. We experience the world that we experience, and that experience can potentially lead us to believe in something that doesn't perfectly match up to the Dharma. However, beyond that experience and beyond our belief systems about those experiences, the Dharma remains absolutely true. As an example, if you experience an object that's very durable and very long-lasting, that could lead you to unconsciously believe that that thing is permanent. There are houses people live in that are hundreds of years old. There are tools that people are using that are hundreds of years old. There are cars people drive around that are decades old. Because those seemingly stretch beyond the boundaries of our window of perception, which only stays open from when we are born to when we die, we may think that those things suggest permanence. That permanence may be conventionally or provisionally true, at least in the extent and scope of our window of perception, which is open from when we're born to when we die. But when you zoom out, you see that impermanence remains absolutely true, because those items will certainly one day become dust, and that dust will certainly one day become something else. This doctrine of two truths is applicable all the way up to the level of abstraction as to include the lowercase s self, or the uppercase s self, and all of reality. From this description, you may be wondering, okay, well, it seems like Buddhists want to live entirely on the side of absolute truth, not the conventional or provisional truth. That's actually not necessarily true. If it were like that, it would imply a dualism that doesn't exist. Rather, this doctrine simply describes two halves of the same state of being. It's a derivation of middle way philosophy that acknowledges, yes, impermanence is true, and no, reality is not a disconnected stream of constant chaos and change. The way I am and the way things are in this instant is pretty much how I can reasonably expect them to be in the next instant, and the one after that, and so on and so forth. There is what is called relative, conventional, or provisional continuity in the stream of reality. However, change still exists. Chaos still exists. So the relative continuity is the conventional truth, but the absolute truth is impermanence, emptiness, karma, etc. Looking at this koan through the lens of the doctrine of two truths, we can see a couple of new layers of meaning. To start with one, we can see this koan challenging us to understand how the Buddha can be a shitstick on both the conventional and the absolute level. When we pursue it on the conventional level, we see the metaphorical or symbolic connections that I explored briefly earlier, for example. We see that the Buddha and the shitstick both wipe away impurities. We also see how they both share everyday characteristics in that they're made of matter, they're subject to the laws of physics, and they take up space. Importantly, we can see that they both have suchness and Buddha nature. They're both subject to impermanence and emptiness. This is an important foundation to jump off from to get to the level of absolute truth, and it shows that conventional reality is not supposed to be thought of as less than, or somehow worse than absolute reality. They're two sides of the same coin. The goal of Buddhism is not to live entirely in one and not the other. Rather, it's to completely see both in either one. It's to see how the absolute truth of Dharma and Buddha nature is related to and expressed through the everyday reality that we experience. It is to see the Dharma in everyday experience and reality. Speaking to this koan in the context of absolute truth, the relationship between the shitstick and the Buddha that is given takes a particular form. We've talked about the Dharma and about Buddhahood in a very universal context on the show recently. We've said that certain schools of Buddhism, Zen included, see everyday reality as being not separate and no different from the Dharma realm. Everything in reality is Buddhahood, in that it has suchness, and suchness is a window through which we can see Buddha nature and emptiness. And if all can be seen from one, then one can be seen from all. Like I've been saying, it's easy and fun to apply Buddha nature to pretty and pleasant things, but Buddha nature also even applies to vulgar, impure, and immoral things too, inasmuch as they are a part of the grand narrative of the Dharma. Now, everything I've just described is knowable. I have this information in my head, and I've written it down and spoken it out on this show, and now you can have it in your head. However, is it experienceable? Can you not just know it, but actually cognize it in your everyday stream of experience? That's the challenge that this koan and that Buddhism presents to you. If you can experience the Buddha in a shitstick, you've made progress toward enlightenment and Buddhahood. It takes a lot of work. You have to see past your own connotations and conceptualizations of poop and of the Buddha. You have to empty yourself out and open yourself up to the pure level of experience that I've been alluding to. And let me just say, easier said than done. I hope you've enjoyed my discussion of Unmon's Kanshiketsu. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.